CollabTalk is a copyright of Collaborative ABA Services, making a difference in children's lives.
Hi everyone, welcome to CollabTalk, a series by Collaborative ABA Services that provides information and resources on autism and everything in between. I am Alicia, the founder of Collaborative ABA Services. I'm here with some amazing team members.
My name is Katie. I'm an occupational therapist.
I'm Bree. I'm a BCBA.
I'm Meg. I'm a registered behavior technician.
And I'm Alyssa. I'm the social worker.
So today we're breaking down ABA terms into clear, everyday language that everyone can understand. Applied behavior analysis, or what we call ABA therapy, often includes specialized terminology that may be unfamiliar to families and professionals outside of the field. As ABA practitioners, it's essential that we communicate in a way that promotes clarity as well as understanding. To support caregivers and providers that may be unfamiliar with ABA terms, we'll be reviewing some of the most common terms that you're likely to hear. Please note that the episode is not intended to critique or endorse any specific providers. Our goal is to simply educate and empower our community by increasing awareness and understanding of ABA language. All right, team, let's get started. So, first term, ABA.
Stands for Applied Behavioral Analysis.
Alrighty. Second term that you're likely to hear is ASD.
Autism spectrum disorder. Typically, it's shortened to autism. Most people say that.
Yeah.
Next term, I'm looking at Bree. Board Certified Behavior Analyst.
Yes. So this is an individual that would have a graduate level degree and has a certification in ABA, or Applied Behavior Analysis.
And you most often see it as BCBA.
Yes,
right?
exactly. Good point.
Next term, Registered Behavior Technician. Meg.
That is somebody who works one-to-one, usually with children with ASD, and is supervised by a BCBA.
And also, there's special certification by the BACB that also gives us BCBAs our certification. They also give Registered Behavior Technicians their certification as well. Next one, Functional Behavior Assessment.
Also known as an FBA. So this is an assessment. They can look very different. It could be something as quick as a questionnaire or something more intense provided by the BCBA, but it's to find the function of the actual behavior.
And it's kind of like the first step, right? It's
Yes.
when you're doing the observations, you're talking to the parents, you're meeting with the family, so it's that first step to find out, well, how can we then create a plan to help support
Correct.
your child?
Yep.
Speaking of planned, next one is Behavior Intervention Plan. So I will actually take this one.
Perfect.
So a Behavior Intervention Plan, better known as a BIP, is based on the results of what we call a functional behavior assessment. And a functional behavior assessment, as you guys mentioned, is made up of information looking at the behaviors that we're looking at assessing and determining why is this behavior occurring, but also what is the function or why this individual might be displaying these behaviors. So the information from the functional behavior assessment is incorporated into the behavior intervention plan, and that's what we use to also develop strategies and help support caregivers, teachers, and other providers that are working with that child.
Sometimes in schools I've seen a behavior support plan
Yeah.
rather than the intervention plan. Is there a difference if parents are wondering?
So a behavior support plan and behavior intervention plan kind of are interchanged, and they kind of go hand in hand. They both should be based on assessments.
Yeah.
No behavior plan or support plan should just be thrown together. It should be based on actual information and data that's collected. Next one, preference assessment.
That's a good one.
It's utilizing different strategies to kind of find out what is super reinforcing to the learner, kind of using that as a tool to ensure their progress by having items or activities available to motivate them.
I feel like, and I always say to parents, it's a way to find out what interest your child has, or like what is most interesting to your child.
What their preferences are. what
Exactly.
they like.
Yep,
It can be,
exactly.
like ever changing.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
How about ABC data collection?
So this is something we do a lot in ABA. So the ABCs stand for the antecedent, so what happens before the behavior. The B is behavior, so what behavior you are looking at. And C is consequence, so what happens directly after the behavior occurs. And we collect this data to kind of find out what the function of the behavior might be or what is occurring to then influence that behavior to take place.
And I think that for families, the consequence doesn't mean like what we do or what is the consequence.
very
It kind of
good.
means like what happens afterwards. So
Yes.
when I first started learning about ABA, I had a BCBA talk to me about how the consequence is not necessarily what we do, but like what happens as a result of that, right? So if a behavior is avoidance based, then the consequence is that learner or that individual can avoid what that is. If it's gaining access to something, the consequence is I now get what I was looking for. So it's kind of what's the function of it and kind of the tracking overall to see like, are they doing this to avoid something? Are they doing this to get access to something? Are they doing this because it's a a sensory thing? Kind of what does it mean?
Yeah.
Right. With the antecedents, there could be multiple, like people, setting, environment, activities, demands.
Nice. Nicely well said, guys. How about baseline? So with baseline, we try to collect baseline data. And that basically is data that we collect at the beginning to kind of see or meet the child or individual where they are. And baseline can look at, okay, how often is a child screaming or how often is a child raising their hand? And we're looking at that before we implement the intervention. So the baseline is really collecting information on the child's behaviors before the intervention is implemented. Next one, maladaptive behaviors.
So this is usually behaviors that are preventing the child to learn, to
Interact with others.
yeah.
Sometimes
They
in a
don't-
social setting.
They don't serve the child or the learner.
Right.
Like in OT, a maladaptive behavior is something that's not functional or doesn't help, right?
Right,
So
Yeah.
exactly.
like screaming is sometimes referred to as a maladaptive behavior because if you want to get something or if you're trying to have access to something, you're trying to communicate something, screaming is not always the best way to do that. So it's most often behaviors that are not the best function or the best way for that person to access what they need.
Right.
Well said. Next one is replacement behaviors.
So this is typically to replace those maladaptive behaviors, right? So if it was a behavior such as screaming, maybe the replacement behavior is using functional communication or using their words or an AAC device to say, I'm all done or I want more.
Or like requesting breaks for out of seat behavior or elopement, things like that.
Next one, manned, and I'll take this one. Manned, when I hear the word manned, I think command in a way because manding is the child's way of requesting what they want. And it can look like, them giving us pictures to request certain things. It can be like gestures or even verbally asking for something depending on the learner's profile and what they can or cannot do.
Yeah.
So manned is actually short for me, I think of command for requesting.
Yeah, and I think if a child's nonverbal, you see them kind of taking your hand and pulling you to the refrigerator or to the snack that they want or the toy that they want.
Next one, tact.
So this I always think of as like a label or like tree or maybe cup. And the difference between that manned is intact isn't like I want the cup. I'm just saying, hey, there's a cup there, or hey, red, blue. Trying to think of other examples. Just labeling things in their environment.
Or they see a picture of a dog and they're like,
Yes.
dog.
It's making the connection between what I see and there's some sort of communication
Right,
related
right.
to it. So it's not necessarily I want the dog, but
Right.
it's like, oh, I can identify that is a dog.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Which reminds me of like receptive and expressive language, right? Receptive is like understanding, like, oh, touch the dog. They understand what a dog is, or
Right.
labeling it themselves.
Right.
Expressively.
Expressive.
Right. Next one, functional communication, which is very big for children with autism and maladaptive behaviors. What do you think, guys?
It's pretty wide. I think functional communication sometimes can also go hand in hand with like a total communication model, but it's kind of what is the best way for that individual to express their needs or their ideas. So it can be using pictures, it can be pointing to something, it can be using an AAC device, it can be verbal communication, but it's kind of what is the best functional way for them to express themselves.
Yeah.
discrete trial training, or sometimes they call it discrete trial instruction.
Mm-hmm. So this is typically when there is discrete trials. So maybe if you're working on something such as receptive ID, like we were just talking about. So it's really a very controlled setting where you would have, the 3 cards out and you are doing just trial by trial teaching. So you would say, touch the dog, and you would want the child to touch the dog, and that would be one trial.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of other ways
And it's
to
like
describe
repetitive,
it. Yes.
like repetitive learning. So the key is we're trying to build fluency in that for that learner, which kind of leads us to the next definition or term, errorless learning.
So that's going to be, if we're going back to DTT, discrete trial training, that's going to be essentially when you have, the cards laid out and you want a child to touch dog, you are quickly instructing them, where's dog, and you're pointing to it or you're gesturing with them so that there's no room for error for the child.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it helps to decrease confusion and make it easier for the learner
Right.
to understand because if they're learning a new, task or a new concept, if there's a possibility for them to be confused about it, it then makes the learning a lot longer versus if you have errorless learning, it's like, oh, that's what I'm looking for. Oh, this is kind of what we're going for. Then it makes progress not necessarily faster, but smoother for the person because they know what's going on.
Yeah.
Especially for some of our kids that maybe have a shorter attention span, right? So if I'm asking you to touch dog and I'm allowing you to touch fish and cow first, and then I'm prompting you to touch a dog, and then you get reinforcement, that sometimes becomes confusing to the learner because, hey, okay, am I supposed to touch
The other
fish
child first.
and cow and then I touch the dog?
Right.
So they're really not learning what we are trying to learn.
Right. So like the level of prompting is really
Right.
individualized too.
Yes.
Extinction.
I know this one.
Interesting.
Most often in OT world, like we hear extinction go with like an extinction burst, but
Uh-huh.
kind of extinction similar to, animals, right, is the diminishment or the decrease of that behavior when things kind of go through. So it's, the data can show it, different individuals can identify it, but it's kind of when that behaviors or that kind of thing decreases to the point that it's no longer impacting their ability to do what they want.
Typically, it's taking all reinforcement away from that behavior in more of a sudden way compared to other interventions. So typically that is why you see the extinction burst, because all reinforcement is removed right away.
Right.
I feel like in the field it's usually not your first choice for intervention.
Or if they do, they pair it with reinforcement, which
Yes.
is one of the terms we're going to go into as we go on. Fading is the next one. Fading, when I think of fading, I think about like reduction and like prompting, because you want to have the learner become less dependent on the assistance needed to reach their goals or master a specific skill. So when I think of fading, I think about like the reduction in assistance or prompting. Generalization.
I feel like a lot of times this is overused or wrongly used.
Overgeneralized.
Overgeneralized. So generalization is being able to take a skill with one person, one setting, and be able to use that same skill with other people, other settings. And I think sometimes it's used as like, trying to think of an example.
It kind of becomes more open-ended.
Yes.
But it's more like that concrete skill, right?
Right,
So
correct.
examples like if you're practicing hand washing in your bathroom at home,
Right.
generalization would be washing your hands when you go out to eat, when you go to
Yeah.
grandma's
Right.
house. So it's not like, oh, I've suddenly become just good at all of this. It's like
Right.
I've become good at this concrete thing.
Right. And I will wash my hands with mom, and I will wash my hands with aunt.
Yeah.
You know, like being able to do it with other people too,
Mm-hmm.
which is hard for our kids too.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Reinforcement. We hear this term an awful lot. Reinforcement, we look at whatever the consequence was, it increases the likelihood of the behavior occurring in the future. So that is the difference with reinforcement. If whatever occurred or event occurred after the behavior and the behavior increases, that means that we can say that it was reinforcement. How about reinforcers?
So these, we refer to reinforcers as usually tangible objects that maybe the kiddo gets after a behavior that we want to increase occurs. Sometimes it could be an edible. Sometimes it could be a tangible item.
Verbal praise.
Verbal
Some
praise.
Social praise.
Yeah,
Yeah.
social praise. Yeah.
I feel like, again, if you go back to like your preference assessment, it all depends on what interests and what the children really like.
And they kind of go together, right? Like reinforcement is the general concept of providing something highly preferred to be able to increase the likelihood of more preferred something happening and decrease the likelihood of something less preferred. But the reinforcers are, okay, what are we actually using to create reinforcement?
Next one is punishment. So when you look at punishment, you know, similar to reinforcement, you know, you're saying that like there's an event or some type of consequence. Reinforcement, the opposite, increases the likelihood of the behavior from occurring. But punishment, on the other hand, decreases the likelihood of the behavior occurring. And sometimes when you hear the word punishment, the first thing people think is, oh my gosh, somebody's going to timeout. And punishment doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, a child going into timeout. It can be other things. For example, a punishment procedure can be like something like overcorrection, where like you have a child that like rips up their homework. So, okay, they rip up their homework, they're going to have to do another worksheet. And now for them to take a break from whatever that task is, they got to do to complete the worksheet. And what happens is that child is less likely in the future to rip up their homework because they don't want to have to do the extra work. So that would be an example of punishment. The next one we have is prompts.
So prompts can look very different. There's a prompting hierarchy, so meaning the most invasive prompt may be fully physically prompting someone, where a prompt could also just be pointing at something. It really is just there to help guide, teach the client, and also making the learning just a little bit easier too.
I think it also coincides with like fading. You want to fade a prompt to be the less invasive as possible, so that they're gaining that independence on whatever task is being presented to them.
I feel like chaining goes along with that a lot too, with fading the, like, I always think of hand washing. If they're good at beginning it or if they're good at ending it, where do you prompt? How invasive is the prompt?
So really prompting is just giving assistance to the learner to complete the task or skill. So is there any other terms? I feel like we had quite a few today, but is there any other terms that you guys can think of that we might have didn't have on our list?
I think one of the things that we talked about, but it wasn't actually a term, is something called assistance. So, like in OT land, there's like we actually can like level different types of assistance. So there's like completely dependent, which means that the person doesn't do any of the activity, versus independent means they do all of it. So sometimes you might see like moderate assistance, minimal assistance. So it kind of just identifies how much the adult, when you're working with children, is doing for the child, and then how much the child is, and as you go up and down, the percentage or the amount that the person versus the child is doing will change.
Good point. One thing that comes to mind that we didn't mention is regulation and sensory, because I know for our kiddos, especially that are on the spectrum, you hear that word a lot, you know, sensory and regulation. And Katie, you're the occupational therapist of the group. So can you kind of elaborate a little bit more on?
Totally. So sensory and regulation usually go together, but they're kind of separate concepts. So sensory is really focused on how your brain and body feels and your ability to interpret the world around you. So we all know about senses, and it's something we can definitely go into more detail, but most often it's, are they sensitive to things? Are they avoidant of certain things? Are there things that they're seeking and they enjoy? So kind of looking at what kind of sensations, whether it's touch, smell, movement, that they like or want to kind of help with that. Most often children with ASD who are getting ABA also have like a sensory diet to help support that. I know we collaborate a lot on our clinic, on our kids to kind of support that. And then regulation is how organized and how calm and available you are. So a lot of the time you'll see something called dysregulation, which means you're kind of just like totally like, you know, not present. You're stressed, you're upset, you're angry, you're sad, you're just kind of like, ugh, you don't feel good. versus regulated is I'm more organized, I'm calmer, I'm available for learning. So it's kind of similar to like we talked about with assistance, where there's those two ends. Kind of you can split regulation into dysregulation or regulated. So either I'm organized and I'm available to learn, or I'm dysregulated and I need a break or I need a strategy to help me get back to being available.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. Today I think was very productive. Thanks for tuning into this episode of CollabTalk, where we talked about some common ABA terms that you may hear. If you found it valuable, don't forget to like, subscribe, and also hit the bell so you never miss an episode. Got thoughts or questions? Drop them in the comment section. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, let's keep this conversation going. To learn more about Collaborative ABA Services, check us out on our website at collaborativaabaservices.com, and also additional social media pages such as Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and
TikTok.
Oh, yeah, and TikTok. Bye.
CollabTalk is a copyright of Collaborative ABA Services, making a difference in children's lives.